Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to the channel, Reading Ideas. I was a secondary school math teacher in the UK in a couple of quite tough coastal towns in northwest England, and I've done quite a bit of research on the UK examination system and qualifications, and I believe that I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I probably know more than most. And I put together a book on it, and I've also put together quite a long presentation, and I could be having quite an important presentation coming up with some influential people. So I'm going to practice and I'm going to talk you through what I believe are some true things about education and qualifications, and what exactly it will lead to, whether there'll be any changes or what, who knows. But I believe everything I say will be true. Now, before I kind of do that presentation, I'm working on a little bit of an introduction. Now, if you have been a teacher, then, or if you've been a nurse, or you've worked in anything that involves the general public, particularly like a caring profession, then this might resonate with you. Now, I was just wondering where to start then. I'll start with this. So there was something that, as a teacher, when it was coming towards the end of term, I wouldn't say something that haunted me, but kind of close. Because at the end of each half term or the end of a school year, then somebody would be retiring, and it was nearly always the same thing. So somebody had worked in teaching for 20 years, 10 years, 35, 40 years, and it would be likely the first time that this person had stood up in front of, or had spoken in front of, the whole staff, and they would always have a tale to tell. There'd always be something, some kid, some story that had got to them, and if you've been a teacher, you'll know, you go into a classroom, the door shuts, 25, 30, 40 years later, you've probably spoken to about 5 adults and you come out the other side. So this was kind of their one chance to kind of talk it through, this thing that had hit them and had probably be with them for the rest of their lives. And I kind of wanted, as well as that presentation on just technical things, I wanted to get that humanity across. So I'm going to do that a little bit of my kind of teaching career. So when I went to junior school, I just used to kind of muck about a bit. I wasn't really kind of that bothered about learning. It was more about playing with my pals at break, and kind of lessons were a bit of a chore and a bore. Little did I know it, but I was going to be the last year to take what in England they call the 11 plus, which was a selection to see if you were good enough to go to the local grammar school. And I was young, and a May birthday, so quite young probably in the class. I took this exam and I didn't pass this exam. I wasn't expecting to, but a few of the class disappeared off to the local grammar, and that was the first time that I came across in education the large forces at work behind the scenes. And it was kind of like, oh, is it unfair that this is the last year of 11 plus? So lots of discussion on that. But anyway, I was going to go to the secondary school just down the road from my house, and this had a very bad reputation. It was, oh no, you're not going there. You're going to have your head flushed down the toilet. You're going to have your head flushed down the toilet. So I went to this school, new school, everybody ginormous, rough as anything, and I wouldn't say I was petrified, but my eyes were wide open. Now the funny thing happened was that I just went into the class, and I don't know whether it was my eyes were wide open, but all of a sudden I was listening to the teacher and everything was just easy, and I suddenly found myself topping the whole school at maths, sciences, and not so much the English, but I was okay at English. So it was very strange that it just might kind of just change like that, and suddenly I was an intelligent boy, kind of thing, and that was very, very strange. There's a couple of stories that kind of stand out. So it was getting towards year 11. It was the old 5th year, and I was wondering what to do, and I'd had the idea perhaps that rather than going straight into work, which most of the people in the school did then, back in the 1980s. I've missed something out, I'll come on to that in a second. So so I was thinking of going and studying A-level maths at college, and I was in the math class, and I nearly said his name then, I won't say his name, and the math teacher was going through some question, and he was like, come on everybody, come on, can anyone find it? And I gave the answer that there were 2 solutions, because it wasn't just +1, it could also be -1, and I was feeling a bit proud of myself. And he was like, so now bearing in mind that this was in the early 1980s, Margaret Thatcher came into power and decided to cut off a lot of government spending because the country was going bankrupt. Now what she didn't realise is that our little school was being shut, and 3 schools were being merged together in a school that had been talked about for 20 odd years, and they cut the money off part way through. So I was on a school, and it sounds unbelievable, but it's completely true. Granada Reports came and filmed at the school. I was in year 8 because we'd had 1 year of a school, shut it. And we would walk to school in the winter across planks that were through mud. This is no joke. While they were still building the school, and would be moved from class to class that were just breeze block, and the heating in the class, I never had it as tough as in my day. The heating in the class was fan heaters, and you'd get moved around, and it was a nightmare for the teachers, because the teachers had to move between 3 separate school sites. There were 7 and 8 on this new site that was still being built, some flat roofed monstrosity, and there was a year 9 was on a separate site. So and then year 9 and 10 was on a 3rd site, so teachers were having to travel in between, and of course blaming Margaret Thatcher and her cuts. So that was the kind of the backdrop, and I was on the way out of class, and there was my math teacher with his head in the Guardian, with his nicotine stained fingers and teeth, and very thin in hair, and he could see me hanging around. Hi Nigel, you all right? I said, yeah. I said, that answer, I did quite well there, didn't I? I was looking for a bit of, a bit of praise or something, or a conversation about it. And he kind of, sighed, put his newspaper down like he'll give me the trouble of a minute or two. And he said, yeah, it was quite a good answer. What is it? Just showing a bit of interest. What is it that you're thinking of doing next year? And I said, well, I was thinking of going to 6th form and studying A-level maths. And bearing in mind that I was the best, I was getting top marks in in maths, and I had for 5 years. My maths teacher, who I liked, laughed at the idea that I could go and study A-level maths. And I thought, you swine, not me, but you've condemned the entire school. You're the maths teacher in this school, and you don't think that there's a single person in the entire school that is capable of doing A-level maths. And I thought, right, there and then, that's it, I'm going to do it. So that's one of my stories of education. Now, like I said, unbelievably, I came out with 4 GCSEs, 3 Bs and a C. One lad got 5 Cs straight through, but I argue I got the best results in the school. Now, can you imagine that was the best results in the entire school? 3 Bs and a C. So it wasn't a great school, but exams were tougher back then. Anyway, so so during the exams, a lot of kids didn't take exams, they'd left, and most pupils were allowed to leave the exam hall early. A lot of kids just fell asleep. So by the end of some of the exams, there was just like me, there's just kind of like sometimes just me or 1 or 2 kids left in there. Now, one time during one exam, I don't know which exam it was, I'd finished the exam. I might as well come into the sun. I finished the exam, and I went to get my coat in the changing room, and I found my coat in the urinal, pissed on, it's urinated on. And I think all these years later, I know who it was. There's a bit of a sad tale about him. But I was very upset by this, obviously. Being 15 and that kind of thing happened, and I didn't know, was it I didn't know, is it just kind of they're just doing it because it was just there, or was it targeted? Because I was the SWAT or whatever, doing well and going to get an education, and they weren't. I've got no idea. So I still to this day don't have any idea. But I thought, is that, are they kind of like, we'll kind of teach him kind of thing. So that's part of my education tale. I then went off to study A-levels, and I had a very, very strict physics teacher, and the maths teacher was a very political union rep and hardly ever there. So I then found that physics was more interesting and maths was quite boring, and I came out of there with a C in physics and an E in maths, which were 2 passes, but obviously not fantastic passes. And I decided I'd had enough of this learning malarkey, and I was going to go off into the world of work. And I worked at Boddington's Brewery, and one of the most interesting things was the characters there. Some tales there. The local IRA were in Strange Ways prison at one point, and every time they came out to do one of the trial days, they came past in like a motorcycle, one going one way, one going another. So that was part of the historical times then. But I then left that and went to a job at the NHS. I decided it was only going to be a year's long, so I quit that anyway and went and worked as a clerical assistant at the NHS. They were deciding to merge the buying operations. So instead of each local authority buying syringes, they pooled it and tried to get a better deal. And it was in this buying office. And so I went there. And while I was there were 2 types of managers. There were those that had worked their way up and had a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, and there were those that had been to university and were a bit hoity-toity, and so it was very stark, the difference between the two different styles of managers. And I remember this because I was thinking at the time, do I carry on working and try and work my way up, or do I actually go and get a degree? Because I'm coming to an interesting tale in a second. So I was thinking this, but I was beginning to realise that because at the time, under Margaret Thatcher, there was mass unemployment. Lots of jobs became professions. So they changed it so that you were required a degree. You couldn't move up if you had a degree, and I could see that was the way that the country was heading. So I was thinking, do I go for a degree? But I'd found studying quite boring and dry, and so that was the position that I was at. To travel there from my hometown of Bury into Manchester, I caught the train into Manchester Victoria. And one day I was on the train, and there was a guy who was in my maths class at the time, and he was like an older character, and he'd failed his maths I think twice before, and he was taking it for his third time. And it was not a big thing, but a little bit of a class joke that here he was still not quitting and keeping going at it. And I was chatting to him, and he'd said that he'd passed and he was thrilled to bits. I was really pleased for him that he'd stuck with it and he'd passed his maths. And we got off the train, and if you picture the scene in Manchester, it's got a high dome, very, very high ceiling, an old Victorian building, red brick. And we were parting, sounds like a romantic scene, but it wasn't. I was going off to work and he was going a different way, and he was stuck in this crowd, moving further and further away from me. It was like a parting scene at a train station. He was moving further away in this crowd, and I shouted, and I suddenly realised, hang on a second, he's gone to uni, he's been trying desperately to go. I didn't know what subject he was studying, so I shouted to him. God, I can't remember his name. Shouted to him, what are you studying? And I could see that he understood me, and he was shouting back to me the topic that he was studying. And I did the international signal of, I don't understand. Yeah, so I'm like, can't understand. And I kid you not, he went like this, and he shouted, acoustics. And I looked up as he kind of did it, and I kid you not, his voice came off the ceiling to me, and I heard acoustics, and I went, wow, and I went, just one of those moments, right, I am going to go to university, there is a place for learning, but I'm going to pick something a bit more practical. And I looked into it, and I chose business studies. I was going to do business studies, to work your way up in a company with a degree. So, yes, so off I toddled to uni. I studied, business studies. That was fantastic. Some interesting things there. And the only little thing there is, I can remember when we were finishing the degree, really was a great time there, that we were looking on the jobs board for different jobs, and there's a girl there, and she said she said something like, she didn't say it was all right for you, I can't remember her exact words, but she said something, and I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, I hope they'll employ me because I'm a female. And I thought, what are you on about? If we were doing essays, if we had a joint project to do, there were lots of joint projects. You'd never think, oh God, I hope I get, if it's going to be 4 people, I hope we don't get one of them girls. It just didn't occur to me. So I thought, that's a real strange thing to say. And I thought, are people like that? Little did I know the time that we were heading in for when, with positive discrimination. But that's a different tale, isn't it? That's a different tale So anyway, I got a graduate job in the potteries. But that was further north, back near home, and unfortunately the potteries was a dying industry, because the other thing that was happening at the same time was that, due to globalization, my uncle worked, he was a yardman, he was just a warehouseman, and he spent 20-30 years crating up English machinery to be packed off to the east to be the new cheap manufacturing place. So I joined the potteries at the wrong time, where all the work, it was already a struggle in this country in manufacturing, but it was all being moved to China and where have you for cheap labour. So it was a dying industry, the potteries. So it became obvious that that career prospects were not going to be great, and I'd been thinking about it, to do something, less, not the word, less. What's it called? Not cutthroat. What's the word? When you work for, whatever. So I thought I'll go into teaching and try and put something back. And I looked up business studies. I went rung up a few places, and they said, well, there's not a lot of jobs in business studies, but there's a shortage of mathematicians. Your maths would be good enough to teach maths. Why don't you do that? So maths was just something that I'd found easy up until A levels, when I'd got bored with it. It was just something that that I took to. So I thought, well, yeah, why not? I'll go and become a maths teacher. So off I toddled to be a maths teacher. God, I'm 20 minutes in and I'm not fully into the teaching bit. So hopefully you're still with me. Now, okay. Right now, I've got to be fairly unique, apart from the people at the time, that 3 weeks into my teaching practice, so this is just as a trainee teacher, I'd done a year conversion course from business studies, so a year in college again, which was great, but then we were straight into schools, learning on the job, and 3 weeks into my teaching practice, I was holding I was holding a dead pupil in my arms. So I'll be very, very brief. I sat in the staff room. There was 5 of us, I think, 5 of us, 1 male and 3 female trainee teachers. A woman came running in and said, we've got a collapse, where is everybody? And we said, well, everybody else is taking their forms, we're waiting for the lesson to start and to go and observe. And they said, well, you'll have to do, we've got a pupil collapsed outside. So went outside thinking that there'll be, some kid will have hurt his leg or something and she's struggling to pick him up, and that there'd be nobody there, and went outside into the quad in this school, this square, and everybody was there. I could see the head teacher, who was looking around, and I thought, he's thinking of the headlines in the newspaper. I could see a girl in the top window looking. There were pupils walking in a line through, and other teachers were busy with their back to the action. It was packed, and then ahead of me there were 2 poor women who were trying to hold up a tall, thin, dark-haired boy, and I took one look, and I thought, like tunnel vision, and it was that they're not trying to keep him alive, that he is that he's died and they're trying to bring him back. And I just went straight ahead and tried to help, but then the ambulance came. I won't go into any more details, but basically he died of a congenital heart defect. He was running across the quad with his friends and he collapsed and died, and he would have died before he hit the ground apparently. And so what was interesting is that on that, so which bit, so anything can happen in teaching, but what I learned from that experience was that you could not only do your best, you could do better than anybody else, and yet sometimes it's just not quite good enough. There were 2 jobs going in the school, but it was a religious school, so I didn't apply. They said I was really, really good, and they wanted me to join. This was the head of maths. Apply. I said, well, there's no point. I'm not religious. They'll block me on that. No, apply. So I applied. Another school, there was a job going, but it was on the same day, and I said, well, I can't go because this is a lovely school. I want to work there. But they said, no, you go to your interview. If you don't get it, then come to us 20 miles down the road. If you're coming, we'll wait for you. So, all right. So I went for this interview. There was a woman from the governor's who just, all she did was kept asking me about religion, and I said, the kids won't know that I'm not religious. I will, do the prayers or what have you. And I was sat waiting on the second interview, and the headmaster appeared at my shoulder, tapped me on the shoulder and said, you better get yourself off to the other school. So okay, so I'm not getting one of the jobs because of the religious thing then. That's fine. You could have told me that at the start. Anyway, so off I toddled to this other school, and I wasn't in the mood for that. That was such a bad interview there. Anyway, things happen for a reason, don't they? But on the afternoon that the pupil had died, I'd gone back to the college, and it was a little late, and only one of my lecturers was there. And I told him what had happened, and he was all, oh, that's terrible. He said, do you want some counselling? I said, not a hell's chance do I want any counselling. I'm not letting those butchers inside my head, was pretty much what I said. And I said, but I must insist on one thing. There's only one thing that I've come here for, that I must insist that all teachers have first aid training. It should be part of our course. And he said, well, we've thought about it and we've looked into it, but it's the cost, so we don't do it. I can tell you now, I was not in the mood to hear that. And to this day, 25, 30 years later, teachers are not taught first aid. It's like a voluntary thing. So there you go. Anyway, I got through my training. I got a job in a school in the north, a coastal school. I won't say where. And so I got 2 year 11 classes, a set 4, which was really a set 7 because there was 2 sides of the year. They'd never had such a low class below. It was very, very special needs. And there was one boy who this was a tough class, and there's one boy who I'd not seen. It's just his name on the register, and I told the other kids in the class, do you know him? Is he? Oh yeah, he won't come in. So anyway, so I said, look, go, you're speaking to, yeah. I said, Gus, tell him to come in. I'm a new teacher, I was young, obviously naive. And I said, tell him to come in, new teacher, give it a try. I said, and if he doesn't, I'm going to go and knock on his door. Did I say I'd drag him in? I don't think I said I'd drag him in. I might have said, So I said, if he doesn't come in, I'll go and knock. You won't. So anyway, so this kid came in, and he was like a bit, acting a little bit tough. And I asked him the question, what was 4 plus 4? And he couldn't answer it. He couldn't answer what 4 plus 4 was. And not much long after, I never saw him again. So yeah, that was that kind of class. There's a couple of funny tales on that class, but the top set on the other side, they don't tell you this about teaching, but it was a top set. There were some incredibly bright pupils in there, but with the way that modern society is and how they've pressured children, there was 3 girls in that class. There's more than 3 girls, but 3 girls that I'll mention. One would faint, faint on stairs or whatever. She'd just randomly faint, and one of the senior leaders thought that she was, just making it up. Never got to the bottom of that. There was another girl who was anorexic, and she looked slightly orange, and it turned out it was because she was anorexic and only eating carrots, and she went off to Manchester every second Thursday. Nobody told me this. Well, the kids told me that. She's having every Thursdays off. What's going on? Oh, she goes to Manchester, sir. And there was obviously a tale behind that. And there was a third girl who was seldom in, but when she was in, she would sit on the back desk at the class with her class book open, and on the clear page, she'd write her work around it on a white clear page, with lines, whatever. She would slowly pick hairs out of her head and make a little pile of hairs on her book. And that was my introduction to teaching. They don't tell you this kind of stuff, do they? And what I would notice over the years, and it happened from that first class, from the bottom set, there was one girl. She was from a big family. She was from quite a big family, and perhaps I was young, and perhaps just liked someone to talk to, whatever. I'd quite happily chat away. So she'd kind of like hang around a little bit at the end of the lesson and just kind of chat, about this and that. And her friend, she brought a friend up, and she said, she won't look you in the eye, sir. She won't look you in the eye. She doesn't speak. So this was my first meeting with an elected mute child, and it was quite often girls. And she said, she won't look you in the eye. And I'm a Liverpool fan. This girl who'd come chatting was a Liverpool fan, and this girl who was elected mute was a Man United fan. So okay, right, sure, she's Man United. Oh, she won't look at you. But my personality is to take a bit of a chance. And I think it was the following Monday, I was walking down the corridor, and she just happened to be walking towards me the other way. And I think United had either lost or drawn at the weekend. This is when they were really good. And she kind of trying to, look, not look, look, not look. And just as she was getting near, I said, "Oh, Man United were terrible at the weekend, weren't they?" And she went, no they weren't. Gotcha. I just smiled and kind of walked on. And I wouldn't say like is not the right term, but again, I don't know whether to say enjoyed is the right term, but working with elected mute children, it was my opinion that elected mute children, wanted to speak. They were thinking about speaking and they wanted to speak more than anybody else did. It was just that they were scared of what was going to happen when they did. They were scared of the consequences, scared of being laughed at or what have you. So I used to, it wasn't my first time of meeting elected mute pupils, and so over the years, I developed a strategy of working with them where I would kind of trick them into speaking. What's Olivia? What's 7/8? She won't speak, sir. She won't speak. It's okay. Give her a chance. And if you could catch them out speaking, not in a terrible way, but in a really honest, thoroughly honest way, before they knew it, they'd spoken, and they'd realised that disaster hadn't ensued, that they were fine, they had been able to speak, and that there's no way that if it was in a class situation that I would let anybody take the mickey out of them or anything like that. And so quite a few times I've worked with elected mute, and so anyway, back to that first class. So I worked so hard with that class. And the girl who was anorexic came back to see me. She was at college, and she brought one friend who'd been in the class with us and a new friend, and she'd come in and she looked really well, bonny girl, and she'd filled out, she'd filled out to like a normal healthy sized girl, and she'd basically come back just to kind of let me know she was kind of okay in this group, in the kind of shy way that they do. And we were kind of chatting, and I was asking how she was getting on, and again I took a chance and I said, "You're looking really well." I said, "You've put on weight." And she this girl who didn't, wasn't like a friend, this girl who was a new friend who hadn't been there, kind of went, you can't say that. But the girl concerned just kind of smiled and said, "Oh no, it's fine, whatever." And she was just kind of smiling, and that is exactly what she'd came to kind of show me. Wow. These things get to you. Anyway, so so that was her. The elected, you never see them all. You don't know what they've all gone on to. But the elected mute girl, she'd had a real tough time, and put herself in a few situations, kind of quietly, kind of looking for help, whatever. And she came back. She came back by herself, and she'd got rid of her glasses, got contacts, was all dolled up, had makeup on, and she came back and was speaking confident. And it was just, she'd come back to kind of show me that, I don't know, when maybe a quiet little thanks in her own way, but just come back to show me that she was doing kind of well. Yeah. So that's the kind of the reason that I'm saying it. I'm not saying names or times or anything like that. It's it's what people don't see. So if you're a parent, it's kind of like you're going to a school. Oh, this, blah, 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 blah. You've told my kid off, or blah, 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 blah. The teachers can't tell you, can they? They can't say, "Oh, yeah, the kid who's just thumped your kid, they're being abused. They are, they took pills last night, the other week, or, their sister's done this." They can't tell you. So, yeah. So it's that human side, isn't it? So, yeah. So what am I missing out? Yeah. Well, I think that's. Is that me? Is there any other kind of little tale that I want to tell? Yeah. there's lots of other kind of tales along the way of pupils. So you don't want to kind of like go into too much detail. I'll say this one. So again, a class, a young kid, and this kid had said something in class, and I'd given a, like, not being cheeky, like a little bit cheeky, kind of speaking when they shouldn't type of thing, and I said something that it wasn't teasing, but it was something, and one or two of the kids just kind of quietly laughed. It wasn't kind of a big deal, but she was a very sensitive pupil, and again, it's the kind of the telltale thing is they kind of hang around your desk at the end. So this pupil was, you have to be careful of my words, stayed after class and just referenced, just said, oh, such and such, oh, blah 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 blah, you said this, whatever. I can't even remember what it was. And this pupil said, yes, well, at least you didn't find your dad who'd hung himself. I won't give the details. And it was like, oh right, yeah, well, that's a really big pressure on you that there. And this pupil went to the lesson, and I went and found a deputy head and said, look, I'm having to tell you what this pupil has just told me, that they said, oh, blah 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 blah. I gave the little tale and said they said that they'd found the father who'd hung himself. And this deputy head very kindly said, well, you'll have to ring up the parents, the other, the parents and guardians. And I said, what, me? He said, well, you heard the tale. Oh, thanks. And this deputy head said, you do know, either she's, this pupil's telling the truth, which is bad, but it might be worse. It might have, the pupil might have made it up. It's like, oh my word. So I rung up, I won't even say the gender of the pupil, and said to the parent, the other parents, oh, your child is doing really, really well in class, blah blah blah. Oh, great, thanks for ringing. I said, but there is one thing. And the parent went silent over the phone, and I said, that they've said that they found their father had hung themselves, and it was silent on the end of the phone. And I'm thinking, that deputy head who's got me to ring, what have they got me into? And the parents said, it's true, they did find their father, but they were so young at the time, we thought that they'd forgotten about it, and we've never discussed it, but they've obviously opened up to you, so obviously we'll have to sit down as a family now and kind of go through it. It was like, oh my word. So I had that person in my class, did my best for them, got great GCSEs, but it's that human story, isn't it? So some people pass exams, some people don't, and you might think your teacher's good, your teacher's bad, but I'm telling you, if a teacher or a nurse or whatever has worked, well, it could be like me, something happens in the first 3 weeks, but you work for any length of time, each of them are going to have these stories, and they probably can't tell you about them even if they want to. There you are.